Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we will discuss the minimum criteria required for Republicans to win an election. We will also look at historical results to confirm the validity of this criteria. Then we will look at why Donald Trump won the 2016 election, why he lost the 2020 election, and whether he will win the 2024 election using this same criteria. So let's get started. Now, most astrologers assess the chart of the presidential candidates in order to determine whether they will win the election. However, elections are not about candidates, they are about the way of life of the people. The people decide the way of life they want for the next 4 years, and this decision comes from the planetary energies at the time of the election. This criteria shows us whether the planetary energies are influencing people into choosing a more conservative way of life. Following extensive analysis of election victories, from Abraham Lincoln's victory in 1864 to Joe Biden's victory in 2020, I have determined the 8 minimum criteria that are required for Republicans to win a presidential election. Let's take a look at historical results to validate this criteria. So here is a table containing historical results confirming the validity of the criteria discussed earlier. So we have the election date, the winning party, the winning candidate, and whether the winning criteria has been met. Now here I have displayed the last 20 elections, and as we can see, every time all 8 criteria were met, Republicans won the election. Now that we have confirmed the validity of the criteria required for Republicans to win the election, let's take a look at the 2016 presidential election. On this slide, there are two charts. The first chart shows us the picture of the skies at 8 a.m. on November 8, 2016, and the second chart shows us the picture of the skies at 8 p.m. on the same day. Now going back to our winning criteria, we see that the second criteria, which requires that Mercury should not be in the same house as the Sun, has not been met. And as a result, at 8 a.m. in the morning, Democrats were set to win the election. However, during the day, Mercury transited into Scorpio. And as we can see, by the end of the day, Mercury is not in the same house as the Sun. Now this criteria was met, and let's look at the remaining criteria. So the first criteria was that Jupiter must not be in Sagittarius, so Jupiter is in Virgo. We have already met the second criteria now. The third criteria is that Mercury must not be in the same house as Venus unless it is behind Venus, and here we see that Venus is in Sagittarius, not in Scorpio with Mercury. Saturn must not be behind the Sun. We can see that Saturn is ahead of the Sun in Scorpio. Ketu must not be in the same house at a higher degree than the Sun. Ketu is in Aquarius and not in Libra. Mars must not be ahead of the Sun in the same house. Mars is not here in the same house with Sun. Mars must not be debilitated. So Mars is not in Cancer. Mars is actually exalted, which is quite favorable to the Republicans. So as all the criteria has been met, Donald Trump won the election by end of the day. So we did notice that early in the morning, Democrats were winning, and then in the afternoon, suddenly to their surprise, Donald Trump won the election. So this helps us validate our criteria in showing why Donald Trump won the 2016 election. Now let's apply the same criteria to the 2020 election and see why Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. So on this slide, we have two charts. The first slide shows us a picture of the skies at 8 a.m. on 3rd November 2020, and the second chart shows us the picture of the skies at 6 p.m. on 4th January 2021. Now the reason why I have not shown you a chart of the skies at 8 p.m. on the same day is because on that day, planets did not change houses. Now going back to our criteria, let's see why Donald Trump lost this election. So the first criteria is that Jupiter must not be in Sagittarius unless it is with Mars. So if we go to Sagittarius, we see that Jupiter is in Sagittarius. So the first criteria has not been met. So now what we know is that even if one criteria has not been met, Republicans lose the election. However, let's take a look at how many criteria were not met on this day. So the first criteria is not met. So the next criteria is that Mercury must not be ahead of the Sun in the same house. So as we can see here, Mercury is not ahead of the Sun. So this criteria has been met. Mercury must not be in the same house as Venus unless it is behind Venus. So Mercury is not with Venus in the same house. So this criteria has also been met. Saturn must not be behind the Sun in the same house. So this criteria has also been met because Saturn is in Capricorn. Saturn must not aspect the Sun. So let's see if Saturn is aspecting the Sun. So Saturn's third house aspect is here. Saturn's seventh house aspect is here, and Saturn's 10th house aspect, so 8, 9, 10. So Saturn's 10th house aspect is on the Sun. So this criteria has not been met. Ketu must not be at a higher degree than Sun in the same house. So Ketu is not in the same house, so this criteria has been met. Mars must not be ahead of the Sun in the same house. So Mars is not with Sun, so this criteria has been met. Mars must not be debilitated unless Rahu is in the same sign at a higher degree than Mars. So where is Mars? Mars is in Pisces. So this criteria has also been met. So out of 8 criteria, 2 criteria were not met. So the first one, which is that Jupiter must not be in Sagittarius, and Jupiter here is in Sagittarius, and Saturn must not aspect the Sun. However, Saturn's 10th house aspect is on the Sun. So as a result, on 3rd November 2020, Donald Trump lost the election. Now let's look at the 4th of January 2021. Now on this day, let's see if all the criteria has been met. So the first one, Jupiter must not be in Sagittarius. And here we see that Jupiter has moved into Capricorn. So this criteria has been met. Mercury must not be ahead of the Sun in the same house. Now Sun is in Sagittarius and Mercury has just moved into Capricorn at 6 p.m. The third criteria is that Mercury must not be in the same house as Venus unless it is behind Venus in Scorpio. So we see that Mercury and Venus are not in the same house, so this criteria has been met. Saturn must not be behind the Sun in the same house. And we can see that this criteria has also been met because Saturn is in Capricorn while Sun is in Sagittarius. Saturn must not aspect the Sun. So earlier, Saturn's 10th house aspect, which was falling on Libra, is not affecting the Sun because Sun has now moved into Sagittarius. So this criteria has also been met. Ketu must not be at a higher degree than Sun in the same house. As we can see, Ketu is not in the same house as the Sun. Mars must not be ahead of the Sun in the same house. As we can see, Mars is not in the same house as the Sun. And the last criteria is that Mars must not be debilitated. As we can see, Mars is in its own house in Aries. Now, while it is not debilitated, it is still weak because it is in its own house. Weak in the sense, like I explained earlier, that when Jupiter is in its own house in Sagittarius, it goes to sleep. Similarly, when Mars is in its own house in Aries, it goes to sleep and it's not as active as it would be in other houses. So as we saw, following 4th of January, the Republicans decided to riot and take over Capitol Hill in order to hand over the presidency to Donald Trump. Unfortunately, the energies of the planets, even though meeting all 8 criteria, were not sufficient to overturn the election. So now that we have discussed why Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, let's look at the 2024 presidential election using the same criteria. So on this slide, again I have displayed 2 charts. So the first chart shows us the picture of the skies at 8 p.m. on 5th November 2024. And the second chart shows us the picture of the skies at 5 p.m. on 6th November 2024. And we will find out why I have put this second chart here. So now let's apply the winning criteria to this chart to determine whether Donald Trump will win the 2024 election. So the first criteria is that Jupiter must not be in Sagittarius unless it is with Mars. So if we look at Sagittarius, Jupiter is not in Sagittarius, so the first criteria has been met. The second criteria is that Mercury must not be ahead of the Sun in the same house. So as we can see, Sun is alone in Libra and Mercury is in Scorpio. So this criteria has also been met. The third criteria is that Mercury must not be in the same house as Venus unless it is behind Venus in Scorpio. So as we can see, Mercury is at 10 degrees in Scorpio while Venus is at 28 degrees in Scorpio. So this criteria has also been met. The fourth criteria is that Saturn must not be behind the Sun in the same house. So as we can see, Sun is alone in Libra and Saturn is in Aquarius. So this criteria has also been met. The fifth criteria is that Saturn must not aspect the Sun. So Saturn's third house aspect is falling on Aries, Saturn's seventh house aspect is falling on Leo, and Saturn's 10th house aspect is falling on 7, 8, 9, 10. It is falling on Scorpio. So hence, this criteria has also been met because Saturn is not aspecting the Sun. The sixth criteria is that Ketu must not be at a higher degree than Sun in the same house. As we can see, Ketu is in Virgo and it is not in the same house as the Sun, hence this criteria has also been met. The seventh criteria is that Mars must not be ahead of the Sun in the same house. So as we can see, Mars is not with Sun in the same house. So this criteria has also been met. The final criteria is that Mars must not be debilitated unless Rahu is in the same sign at a higher degree than Mars. So let's take a look. So as we can see, Mars is in Cancer, so Mars is debilitated at 6 degrees, and Rahu is not in the same sign at all. So it appears that the final criteria might not have been met. So let's take a look at where Rahu is currently positioned. So Rahu is at 10 degrees, which is at a higher degree than Mars, and it is in Pisces. So Rahu's ninth aspect, so 7, 8, 9, is falling on Mars, which is equivalent or almost equivalent to Rahu being in the same house as Mars and at a higher degree than Mars. So it appears that the final criteria might have been met. The reason why I created this second chart is to confirm with certainty whether Donald Trump will win the 2024 election. Now, as we saw earlier, even though Mars is debilitated in Cancer, Rahu's ninth house aspect is falling on Mars, and as a result, the final criteria is almost met. Furthermore, Venus, who was in Scorpio on 5th November, has transited into Sagittarius on 6th November at approximately 5 p.m. Now, every time Venus is in Sagittarius, Republicans win the election. And as a result, with the final criteria being almost met and Venus transiting into Sagittarius, we can confirm with a higher level of certainty that Donald Trump will win the 2024 election between 5th and 6th November, 5 p.m. So in this video, we discussed the minimum criteria required for Republicans to win the presidential election. We also applied this criteria to historical results to confirm the validity of this criteria. And then we applied this criteria to the 2016 election to see why Donald Trump won the election, and to the 2020 election to see why Donald Trump lost that election, and finally to the 2024 election to determine whether Donald Trump would win this election. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will create another video in September when I have assessed the energies in the skies to determine whether Donald Trump will win the 2024 election. Hence, please keep an eye out for that video, and thank you.